We're going to start out first by speaking specifically about fair lending. And fair lending has always been around and has always been a hot topic. It's just that there's been some shifts as to things that are falling under the fair lending category that maybe in the past had not fallen into that category before. So one of the very first things I want to point out is that oftentimes we think fair lending has an awful lot to do with what are the loans. How do we make the loans, and if we don't make the loans, and that's the only thing we have to deal with fair lending. However, we really have what is called fair servicing issues too. It's how you're servicing the loans once the loans go on your book. So it's all from the beginning of the loan to the end of the loan is potential fair lending issues that you may have within the arena. One of the other areas that still is around is minimum loan amounts. And a lot of institutions still continue to use minimum loan amounts. But what the regulatory expectation is that if you have a minimum loan amount, you have a justifiable business reason, and you can justify it and document why that minimum loan amount is set at what it is supposed to be. So that's another area that the regulators have been looking at when they're doing fair lending reviews. Overall with this, it's the use of discretion with regards to pricing, underwriting, account maintenance, servicing, any type of loss mitigation. So when you're in that arena, you have the opportunity where discretion is being used one way within your institution and discretion is being used another way within your institution. And so suddenly you could have where one group of borrowers are being treated in one fashion and another group of borrowers are being treated in another fashion. So again, I want to emphasize this really goes into servicing. It also goes into any type of loss mitigation. Now, fair lending now is no longer just about your HMDA reportable information. Fair lending also has a lot to do with what's going on within your consumer portfolio, any credit card portfolio have, student lending, indirect lending, and small business lending. And what the regulators have started to do is use a fashion called proxies. And when they use those proxies, they are assigning different they're assigning a score, well, not a score, I should say, but they're actually assigning an assumption to your portfolio based on information such as names, such as census tract, where the loan is located, and they're using that to see if there is potentially any fair lending issues within your non-HMDA reportable area. So that is an area of concern, and is an area that most institutions have not done a lot of data analysis on. So they're looking for data analysis on that. And then we move into the return of redlining. And where redlining has kind of come back into the arena is because there are markets where the housing market has now bounced back as fast as one would have hoped. When people are making loans and when financial institutions are making loans, they are inadvertently not making loans in an area where there is no housing market going at the time. And so suddenly you can have what would appear to be a redlining issue when it may not actually be or would not be a redlining issue. And then I want to point out, again, the new mortgage rules and the restriction on credit. One of the things that was the regulators came out with the new mortgage rules, and they said they did not expect it to have an impact on your fair lending, on any fair lending issues within your organization. However, you don't know that until you actually see what's going on within your data. So you may have made some business decisions as to how you were going to implement the new rules, and you're only going to make QM loans or you're going to make some other different types of loans. You need to see what's going on within your portfolio and understand your portfolio to see if it is potentially having an impact on your data. So neck and neck with fair lending is what we also have is UDAPP, which is the Unfair, Deceptive, Abusive Acts and Practices Rule. And so what this really comes down to, it comes down to we have what is a fairness expectation. And when we say that, what we're talking about is it's an expectation that the consumers have an understandability about what you're offering, a predictability, there's value to the consumers, and it's appropriate for the consumers. And this can be for any product or service. It could be any advertising, any process within your organization. UDAPP can cover a whole host of things within your organization. So if you generally try to keep those four principles in mind, you'll have an idea of what you need to look at when you are reviewing things, processes, or services for potential UDAPP issues. Now, you have to point out also, though, that a single practice can be a violation of a federal regulation, and in addition, it can also be a violation to UDAPP. And so it is not uncommon for the regulators to have it as a technical violation in addition to having a UDAPP concern that goes along with that. So let's talk about what some of the things that the regulators are looking at, some of the things that's really under scrutiny right now. Add-on products. The regulators are wanting to see if you are adding on products to consumers. Do they have value? Is it appropriate to them? Do they receive the services that they are paying extra for? Debt collection. They want to make sure that there's no abusive practices within debt collection. Disclosure of fees. Overdraft fees have been around, is a very, very hot topic within the arena, and it still to this day continues to be a very, very hot topic. One of the areas I want to point out in certain regions in the country is the continuous overdraft fees and how those are actually assessed. If you assess continuous overdraft fees on days when you're maybe not open and you charge a fee for someone not being able to cure their overdraft, the regulators view that as being abusive to the consumer because they could not come in and prevent that fee from being charged at that time. Consumer Reg E claims is another area that the regulators are seeing potential UDAPP issues in that arena, and that has a lot to do with a lot of the fraud claims that we have coming in, and banks kind of pushing back on, is it really a fraud claim or is it not a fraud claim? Do we have to pay it? Do we not have to pay it? And so it's the way that Reg E claims are actually being settled in there. Incentive compensation is still out there, and third-party service providers, which actually moves us into our next topic. So what's happening